I want to go back a little bit and get your take on whether the president can fire Lisa Cook for cause. Under the Federal Reserve Act, the president has made clear that he believes he can. But from where you sit, does the for cause clause cover private events prior to membership on the board? Because we know that Lisa Cook applied for these mortgages and said that they're for her primary residency before she was on the Federal Reserve Board.
Right, you're exactly right, Scarlett, and that's one of the key questions here. The courts have not decided whether behavior before a person has taken a job counts as a cause for removing them from the job. In the suit that Lisa has filed this morning, she's arguing that cause must be related to job performance so that it doesn't include anything that happened before she took the job at the Fed.
Scott, I'll break a little news here. The judge has responded now and has set a temporary restraining order hearing for 10 a.m. tomorrow. So we'll be watching the news tomorrow to see if the judge lets her stay on the Fed for the time being. But that raises the question of what is the Fed's obligation here in two senses. If she shows up at the Fed, do they let her in? And second, when we had the issues of trading problems with Fed presidents and with then Vice Chair Clarida, you had an investigation by the Fed Inspector General. Is there any role for the Fed in any of this?
Sure. So your first question about what happens, I think the reason that Lisa's challenge this morning includes a suit against the Board of Governors and against Chair Powell is because she wants a quick answer from the court on whether the court will force the Fed to continue to recognize her as a governor. So I would expect the court to act on that injunction pretty quickly. And in the meantime, I'm not sure there really is any business going on at the Fed, certainly not probably this weekend. So, you know, it's easy for Lisa to cool her heels at home while the court makes a decision about whether the Fed officers must continue to recognize her as a Fed governor.
To follow on what Mike was asking about here, especially with regards to previous questions about investments by Fed governors and regional bank presidents, what exactly is the Fed's role here? Because we saw for those instances that the Fed's Inspector General did an investigation. Is that warranted here, do you think?
I don't think so. This is really about Lisa Cook's personal activities. That would be something outside the Federal Reserve and the Inspector General's purview. You know, that's why the Federal Reserve can't represent her in this case. She needs her own personal lawyer because it is about her dispute with the president about whether she continues to have a job. It's not about the Fed's duties or what the Fed is doing itself.
I'm wondering if you could take us inside your old office. If this had come up and you were still general counsel, what would you have advised her to do or requested her to do? Would the Fed ask for details of the mortgage situation to decide whether or not it should take action?
I don't think so, because there's nothing the Fed can do. Only the president can remove a governor from the position on the board. Jay Powell or the rest of the board members acting together don't have authority to fire her. So doing an investigation would not lead to any kind of action that the Fed could take itself.
How potentially problematic is it, do you think, Scott, that Lisa Cook has not denied nor addressed the underlying allegations of mortgage fraud that prompted this firing by the president? I'm wondering, optics-wise, how problematic it is and how the courts might consider that.
Yeah, I was actually a little surprised in this morning's suit that she didn't look for an opportunity to decide that or to lay out her case in front of this judge. Instead, she's asking for a declaratory judgment that she's entitled to due process. And it appears that what she's expecting is that she would then explain herself, lay out all the facts, either in a suit by the Department of Justice against her for fraud or some other kind of suit that someone else brings based on the action. So she's not looking for this case to explain what activities she actually engaged in.
What would your advice now be to the other Fed Bank presidents and other governors this is something that could happen to anybody, I guess, especially if it was an honest mistake on her part. But obviously the administration is looking for dirt on people at the Fed. What would you be telling them to do? I'm sure there would be some sort of war planning council.
Yeah, it's very difficult to prepare for something like this. I was a little surprised that the FHFA released this application data. That's confidential personal information. It'd be one thing for the FHFA to have sent a notice to the Department of Justice recommending justice do an investigation, but it's quite another for the agency to release publicly release private information on an application. That's very unusual. So I think I would advise other board members and presidents to pay attention to what they're doing. If they are in a situation where they have multiple homes, make sure they've told their banks all about it, so the banks have the opportunity to make adjustments if that's appropriate. But I don't know how you otherwise prepare for something like this.
And just going on with that hypothetical, suppose there is something there is some evidence of a deliberate or inadvertent action on Lisa Cook's part. Would you advise Lisa Cook to resign?
So that's a really difficult question. The inadvertent action, I don't think is cause under the Federal Reserve Act. People make mistakes all the time. The real question is, was a bank deceived in a material way? And that depends on all the information, not just what's on the application. As you know, in a mortgage process, an application gets filed, but the banks often take many months to make decisions about loans, and circumstances change, but the application remains the same. It doesn't change. So as long as the bank knows what's going on and has a view of the facts and can make an honest decision about the credibility and the ability of the person to pay, then there isn't fraud. So that's what you look for and hope that everybody has done in the process.
You're no longer the Fed's lawyer, so I can ask you this question. Which would be worse for the institution, that Cook stayed on even if there was some fraud because it didn't rise to the for cause level, or the fact that Donald Trump would then be able to fire people almost at will?
Oh, I think it's definitely worse for the institution if the president can fire a member of the board at will, or based solely on an allegation that's unproven, undemonstrated. I think in that situation, there really is no independence of the Federal Reserve and its ability to act. And that's got to set markets, make markets uneasy, because then they don't know if the Fed's acting on the basis of data and what the economy is really doing, or if they're acting on behalf of the president and the president's whims. So I think that having no cause is really the worst thing that could happen.
So, Scott, as we wrap up this conversation, are there any legal measures that the Federal Reserve could take to protect its independence as an institution and to shield itself from presidential pressure like what's been happening?
There's been presidential pressure in the vocal sense for the entire history of the Federal Reserve. Presidents always make or often make their views known on what monetary policy should be. But as long as the president allows the Federal Reserve to make its decisions based on the data and its own explanation of why it's making those decisions, as long as that's happening, I think there is independence in the Fed. And I'm not sure the Fed can do anything more to preserve itself. It really does require some respect on behalf of the rest of the government, the president and Congress, to allow the Fed to make its decisions. At the same time, to make their views known, but to then allow the Fed to make the right decision.